It appears that the FIA is struggling to manage a Grand Prix without running into some kind of problems. Following the chaotic Australian Grand Prix, this week's, some say boring, event in Baku could have ended with a disaster. This raises concerns about the extent of FIA's mismanagement and whether they will address these issues before a major incident occurs. To top it all off, Norris and Toto Wolff fired shots towards FIA themselves that weren't related to the incident involving Ocon, which only further deepens the hole FIA dug themselves in. What does this mean for the governing body of Formula One, and when will this whole ineptitude to control the sport end? The Azerbaijan GP unfolded predictably with Red Bull's dominance. The Austrian team secured another 1-2 finish, this time with Perez claiming victory ahead of his teammate Verstappen, who unfortunately pitted just before a safety car was deployed due to Nick de Vries hitting a wall. However, the Dutch driver made a swift comeback and effortlessly overtook Leclerc, while Perez went on to finish the race in first place. The majority of the race proceeded without any major nail-biting incidents, despite the excitement leading up to the event. However, a scary situation unfolded just as the podium ceremony preparations began, when a group of people, including some photographers, entered the pit lane. At that time, Ocon was the only driver who hadn't pitted yet, deciding to do so on the final lap after Alpine's strategic gamble didn't pay off. As Ted Kravitz pointed out during the live Sky Sports broadcast, several individuals lingered in the pit lane, seemingly unaware of the approaching French driver. When Ocon arrived in the pit lane, numerous people had to dodge his car to avoid a serious accident. Luckily, everyone escaped unscathed in this nerve-wracking situation. Kravitz almost screamed during the broadcast as he emphasized the chaos, pointing out that everyone, except the FIA, could have anticipated this. A visibly shaken Ocon later commented on the incident. "It was definitely scary," he said. "I don't know why everyone was starting to prep the podium. We were still racing, and there was all the time in the world to be doing so. It could have been a big issue for everyone there. I'm arriving at more than 300 kilometers per hour, leaving my braking as late as I can, and they were just after the line as well. So if I missed my braking point, I had to brake. I had to avoid, and it was pretty scary. Luckily, it was all good. I had no idea that they were there. I've never seen that before." Usually, as a race comes to an end, it's assumed that all drivers have completed their pit stops, though this isn't always the case. When the race concludes, park firm barriers are set up, and the FIA grants access to official photographers and local marshals to prepare for capturing podium celebrations. A tower is available for photographers to gain an elevated perspective. Nevertheless, this doesn't rule out the possibility of pit stops during the final lap. What made today's race stand out was that everyone closely monitoring the event knew about Esteban Ocon's upcoming pit stop. The team guests area, separate from the access points for official photographers, TV crews and FIA personnel, was situated between the Alpine and McLaren garages. In this area, everyone, including security guards who were reminded of the impending pit stop, was well aware of the situation, so it wasn't an issue involving team guests. The individuals involved were FIA-sanctioned photographers, causing the FIA to effectively investigate themselves. The person in charge of the park firm arrangements has been called to see the stewards. The incident underscores the need to learn when it is safe to allow people into the area. It's safe to say that F1 narrowly averted a potentially disastrous situation today. Another point of criticism from the FIA was the apparent boringness of the event, as the Azerbaijan Grand Prix was primarily focused on discussions surrounding the new sprint schedule and concerns about whether it could detract from the main event on Sunday. However, the absence of thrilling action during the Grand Prix itself emphasized that the current generation of cars is not providing the desired level of spectacle, as anticipated with the introduction of the 2022 regulations. Wolff suggested that the lack of excitement in Baku should prompt F1 and the teams to examine which aspects of the current rules are not functioning as intended. "Today wasn't a thriller," said Wolff after the Baku race. "Just no overtaking, even with a big pace difference. It made it not great entertainment. We have to analyze the weekend with the sprint format, where there are positives that we can take out, but in the end it all comes down to racing. It needs the tough battles. and I think the highlight yesterday in the sprint was George Russell and Max Verstappen being able to battle it out. There was none of that today. Even if you are within a 0.2 of a second, it is very difficult to overtake. Nearly impossible to overtake unless the other driver makes a mistake. We need to really look at it and how we can avoid a boring race. We should not draw hasty conclusions after a single lackluster race weekend, because it doesn't necessarily mean that everything needs a complete overhaul. Instead, what we should emphasize is the importance of understanding why the race wasn't as entertaining as expected. Wolff pointed out that two cars were clearly ahead of the pack, with a significant gap separating them from the rest, and it was difficult to determine which team among Aston Martin, Ferrari and Mercedes was faster, as they seemed to be stuck in their positions throughout the race. Even Perez agreed that the DRS shortening was unnecessary, because it doesn't allow the drivers to overtake as much as last year. Speaking of boring race, Lando Norris stated that he wished the race could have ended after only 20 laps. The McLaren driver began the race in P7, but after pitting just prior to an early safety car period, ended up behind Nico Hülkenberg for a significant portion of the afternoon. As the Haas driver was on a different strategy, and in the final stages of the 51-lap race, Norris overtook Hülkenberg and ultimately secured a P9 finish. I believe this outcome was the best McLaren could have realistically expected under the circumstances. Norris described the race as lengthy and lamented the team's misfortune with the safety car deployment, occurring just a lap after his pit stop. While he didn't lose positions, Norris fell behind Hülkenberg and Ocon, who still had to make their pit stops. But Norris, even without this setback, might have ended up in no man's land, as the other drivers would have pulled away, as he and the team were essentially in their own race, given their pace. Despite the challenges, Norris expressed satisfaction with the outcome, noting that they managed to score a few valuable points, which was the best they could have hoped for under the circumstances. Is it safe to say that FIA are straight up incompetent to officiate a Formula One race? If they continue like this, it's only a matter of time before something terrible happens. Ocon's incident marks another lapse in organisation by the FIA, with this particular case posing a life-threatening risk. It's perplexing how everyone was aware of Ocon's pending pit stop, except for the officials. And to add insult to injury, this is not an isolated occurrence. A similar situation took place last year in Australia when a small group of people were in the pit lane during the race. The FIA's eagerness to proceed with post-race events has raised questions about safety, as people are allowed to roam in hazardous areas, potentially risking lives or causing serious injuries. The recent Baku race resembled a rally event, with spectators lining up close to the track, which is highly unusual for an F1 race. This situation brings to mind Schumacher's 2000 Monza incident, when a track invasion occurred, and his Ferrari was seen speeding through a crowd of people. Changing these rules should not be difficult, and it's unclear why the FIA hasn't taken action. Allowing people in the pit lane when the race is not yet over is a display of incompetence, as the pit lane should be treated as an active racetrack, and just as people wouldn't step onto the track during the race, they shouldn't do so in the pit lane either. Additionally, emergencies can occur, and as Horner mentioned, drivers may need to finish the race in the pit lane. The FIA has much work to do in the upcoming period, not only in managing red flags and the race itself, but also in implementing rule changes regarding post-race event handling. They did summon their representatives in Baku to report to the stewards after the race, so that's at least a starting point. We'll have to see what will happen out of that. Safety should be the top priority for everyone at the Grand Prix, and there should be no debate about it. The individuals involved in the Ocon incident were fortunate that he could brake in time for them to move out of the way. However, there might be cases when that isn't enough, potentially leading to tragic outcomes resulting from entirely avoidable situations, and the pressure is on the FIA to ensure safety at all times. What are your thoughts about this situation? Let us know in the comments below, and after you do that, make sure to watch our next video that goes over the recent issues in Red Bull.